So the next book we're going to talk about is Prairie School, which is an excellent little chapter book that basically just covers the story of a young boy on the prairie with his parents. His parents want to give him an education because he needs it. They recognize that they want him to be more educated than they ever had the opportunity. So they bring in his aunt and she teaches him how to read. Now he's resistant to that, but she wins him over in the end. So it's a great, beautiful little book, but it also introduces students to early American life. So what is that teaching students, Tanya?
It's a life that they don't understand. Most children here now would never have considered the fact that this aunt could get off the train in a wheelchair and her sister not even know that she was in a bad accident and can no longer walk. So how long ago did this happen? And this sister didn't even know that her sister was going through all of this. And so it's things like that just keep popping up, that when he had to walk 2 miles just to get water.
We're so used to fast communication.
Right. This is a real education for children, about what life used to be and how fortunate they are that they can now go to Kroger instead of all. And this is just the beginning. We're going to see more of it in Sarah Noble and in Little House in the Big Woods, and then really culminate in Farmer Boy. I really think that's the culmination, which then leads us all the way up to Anna Karenina. But for these young people, by the time we get to Farmer Boy, which I think is just a really important book for them, for students to understand early America and what it was like, that work ethic in order to survive. It wasn't a work ethic because somebody's just said we need to work hard. That's an important thing. But it was a work ethic for survival and how important that was. And hopefully they'll realize how fortunate they are that they don't have to do those kinds of things for survival.
I think that that's an interesting part about this book, was that there is a transition here, and you can see sort of the generational sacrifice. I mean, we talk about sacrifice all the time, but I think that these stories about early America represent generational sacrifice, meaning I'm willing to do something for a future generation. And even if I don't reap the benefits, my children or my grandchildren or this country will. And so I think that the fact that they want to give Noah an education and are willing to sort of compensate for the work that he needs to do on the farm. I mean, he uses his chores as an excuse not to be educated, but there is an opportunity now because they are willing to, cover some of those chores and relieve him of the daily toil of survival so that he can receive an education and really advance their family. And so I think that's an important thing to point out to the young student.
And I think another thing that students may not realize is that he's going to have access to a very limited number of books.
Right.
So he
doesn't have a library.
Right. And there's no library he can go, into the next town to. And that is, I think, a really important, and it comes up in books all the time, this limited library so that people read the same books over and over and over because it's all they have. And now it's just like everything else in our society. You read a book fast, you put it down, you move on to the next, and there's not really that time for contemplation necessarily. Like that's something we have to work at, to actually contemplate a book, where I've got this bookcase full of books I haven't read and I just want to read through them. But to really slow down, they were forced to do that because he had the Bible and he had this book of, I guess it was like a nature book and some poetry, but he would have been reading those over and over and over.
And that's a great point, that what a connective thing books are in terms of building a community and building a culture. And when you are reading those stories in commonality, you really are growing together in knowledge and in values and those sorts of things. So I think that's a pretty important point, that the limited quantity of books really did contribute to sort of solidarity in the community, and probably gratitude for, bringing the books along, and then a necessity to share the books with others. And you see that, sort of those values on the farm anyway, helping your neighbor and sharing your crops and those sorts of things. But in terms of sharing and education, that's an important point.
What are some other important themes that you guys see in Prairie School?
Well, the value of an education, I think, has got to be one of the major themes, and that it's not that it is hard work. Learning to read is hard work. Learning math is hard work, but it's worth it in the end. It does give you something valuable. It's life changing. It's a transformation once he learned to read, and not just for him, but when he reads the Psalm of Life, the poem, to his parents, and his father, I think, says
Yeah, it has
it's
tears
the
in
most
his eyes.
beautiful poem. His dad would never have read that poem because he couldn't read well. And so Noah was able to give this gift to his parents and to anybody else that he could read.
And I think
to.
it says that he then began to read basically on a nightly basis poetry or scripture. So
to
you're
the
getting,
family.
the family's
Again,
reaping the
community
benefits of
Mhm.
somebody being able to read.
And it's interesting because Aunt Dora introduced and encouraged him to read by trying to offer information about things he was interested in nature and on the prairie, and what's this flower and what's this star. And so she sort of used information as the segue, but the culmination of that is really that he then in turn brought beauty and joy, and he brought sort of transcendentals as a consequence. It started in a very pragmatic way, but the contribution was very transcendental in the end. And I think that was, that's what we're hoping even in classical education. We're starting with memorization and repetition and some of these very practical things, but we're ending with hopefully changed hearts and, formed souls. And so I think this is, an interesting thing to point out in that book. And at the end, when she says, he asks her if she would give up walking or choose between,
which would she
That's
rather
right.
have, the ability to walk or the ability to read?
Right. And she says, books take me farther than legs ever could, which is the Emily Dickinson poem, There Is No Frigate Like a Book, No Coursers Like a Page. I mean, this is what reading does for us. It exposes us to everything, to the world, and we don't have to go anywhere.
Kind of reminds me of the way that, Aunt Dora came across the country to teach Noah to read, and it was hard for her because she is in a wheelchair with the limited capacity, but she still was able to provide this amazing, unique gift to this child that nobody else could in his community where they live. And it reminds me of The Door in the Wall, which, I can easily see when teaching The Door in the Wall that you would go back to this and say, everybody has to find their door in the wall. Everybody has a purpose, and it's not everybody's purpose is the same, and not everybody's gifts. And even though she had limited capacity, she transformed his life. And she had to come across the country to do it. And it took a summer, but she did it. And so she basically had found her door in the wall. And I think that's such an important thing for students because they always want this perfect ending. They want everything to be perfect. They don't want to think about limitations or handicaps. And so I think that's just I don't know why the author put Aunt Dora in a wheelchair, but I thought it was a really brilliant touch.
So you're making connections to The Door in the Wall and There's No Frigate Like a Book. What other connections to other things in our curriculum are you seeing in this book?
Well, there are explicit references, throughout. They talk about Hercules and the constellations, the Little Dipper and the Big Dipper, and the Bible, and there are the things that Noah is learning are the things that our students are going to be learning. Even our kindergarten students, and form an A and then repeat the letter A. And so we're seeing even some of the same pedagogy in this book. And let's go out in nature and let's appreciate God's creation and let's explore that and ignite a sense of wonder, and which is science, which is I have a question about this thing. And so she introduces him to the fact that if he can read, if he gets an education, then he can answer some of the questions about the world or just understand more about it to gain a greater appreciation for that. So all of this is really tied to, it's just such a great book because it is, I think it just relates so well to the young child's experience. He's uncomfortable. He doesn't want to do it. And she encourages him, and he's trying to make excuses. But even the excuses I thought was interesting because, he was like, well, I have to go catch this snake, or I have to go, all these.
Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah.
But, I relate to that. I relate to, I can't sit down and read something valuable because I have to do a load of laundry or because I have to clean the dishes. And so, even that eternal human sentiment to
shirk responsibility.
That's right. Yeah. Or to choose the less, not that it's less valuable. You have to do laundry, you have to do those things, but to not prioritize some of those either more difficult things or greater goods. It's just human nature, and so I like that is pointed out in this book.
I think also that this book shows what well-placed pride is, that he did have to work hard, and he did not want to learn the letters of the alphabet, and it was hard, tedious work. But once he did, and he was able to read, hopefully he recognized the benefit that he was giving to his parents that they would never have. And so just that, not just the accomplishment of learning to read, but what that did for other people. Hopefully he would recognize that he was able to really contribute in a way that even his parents couldn't. Yes, he could walk 2 miles to get water, but so could they. Other people could do that. But he could do something unique that helped his family and his community.
I think that touches on our pride and vanity discussion from earlier.
Well, and something else sort of related to that is that now he has this gift. He has this unique sort of calling or opportunity, and so that places on him a responsibility. And at the end of the book, Aunt Dora he says, well, you're leaving me. Who's going to be my teacher? And she says, you're going to be your teacher now. And so when you have these blessings, you are responsible to use them well. And so now he has this gift, he has this blessing, and he has to take responsibility for continuing to educate himself and his family. And so, I think that he now that he can read, truly the world is his oyster, and he needs to take advantage of that blessing that has been given.
Now, talking about the book from a literary perspective, what are some of the lines or just the beautiful language that students are now going to be reading here that you think might touch them?
I've got my favorite lines. So when she takes him out at night to see the stars and starts showing him what the constellations can do for him, and that he's going to get that knowledge out of a book. Then she says, he says, there are no books on the prairie, because she tells him the way I know how to read the sky and the way I know the story of Hercules that connects to the stars is through books. And he says, there are no books on the prairie. And she says, one of my trunks is full of books. Learn to read and you'll read the prairie. And then at the end of the book, he says in the letter that he writes to her, at the very end, he says, I live on the prairie, but I can read the whole world. So he really does get this gift that's been given to him that I think our students probably in this society take for granted, because most everybody can read. So we don't think what a great accomplishment it is to learn to read.
It's such a basic part of our education.
That's right. When I learned to
key.
read, it never crossed my mind to be thankful for that or to appreciate it. And he has a real appreciation for the fact that he can read. And he sees it for the great gift that it is. And hopefully this book then would help our students to recognize what an amazing gift it is to have the gift of literacy.
And
Maybe not.
I really appreciate it just from a literary perspective that she says, his aunt says to him, you'll be able to read the prairie, and then he takes it the next level at the end, and I'm able to read the world. And there's a similar play that the author does earlier where Noah, the student, says, "Oh, reading is as much use on the prairie as the stars," and yet it's through the stars that he begins to understand how valuable actually reading is. And so I think it's this kind of book, even though it's small, it's a small little chapter book, there's beautiful language, and it's teaching students to pay attention to the words that are being used. And it's providing cohesion. The whole novel, the whole chapter book is cohesive.
Yes.
The vocabulary is repeated and the themes are repeated.
And the fact that it's got these chapters, it's literally the first book where they can use a bookmark.
Yes.
And read a chapter at a time. This is their first real chapter book. And I think it's just so rich. Just, it's not that many pages, and we've talked about it like it is the novel.
Right.
But there's a lot to talk about. I mean, actually, can we going back to what you all were saying about the value of things, and when you were saying that to appreciate reading, I think that is a lesson that even as adults we should take to heart, because we as adults even. The primary student, and it's demonstrated in this second grade year, you have to not only be able to read, but you have to be able to read increasingly difficult and increasingly meaningful things.
That's
and
right.
Even as adults, we struggle to advance ourselves in the books that we are able to read and the ideas that we're able to understand. And so this is not a one and done accomplishment of the human
Right.
being. This is being good readers is a lifelong journey that
right.
we all need to appreciate and work towards being better readers.
Right. I mean, to be a reader of Shakespeare,
Right.
takes work.
It takes that you have to read multiple Shakespeare to ever become a good reader.
Which we talk about this a lot in our Memoria Press curriculum, that the literature is cumulative, and I think that is an underappreciated idea about literature, is that you do have to advance very strategically in order to access more difficult, more meaningful, more complex books. And I think the second grade year is a great year to demonstrate how much advancement the new reader can make in a single year.
After this, it's going to be chapter book after chapter book after chapter book, kind of on the same level. But this is the year when we move from picture book to chapter book to really big chapter book to hard British vocabulary in Beatrix Potter. So this, I think, really, it's just like, it's also the same. Like it feels to me the same as the first grade copybook, where we're moving from the large kindergarten font to a smaller font to a smaller font, and then finally to cursive. This second grade literature year is making that same kind of transition. That once you've made it, then the next real challenge is when we get to Shakespeare and Dante and Homer. But hopefully we've done a good job getting them there.
I think one of the best apologies or defenses of this book is that, unlike some of the other books that are great that we do, it's the one that strikes me as really demonstrating how it's in the act of reading that you unlock all the other things, everything
true.
You're going to learn. All the connections that we saw in here occur because he's learned how to read.
That's right.
And so that's what we're hoping students do when they come to these books.